Doing well. Could we go ahead? I show 4:02. Can we call the meeting?
Sounds good to me. I'm looking through participants and I don't see Julie, I don't think.
And Mark.
Mark. I see Mark.
Oh, he must have slid in.
Okay, I'm pulling up the agenda here, Denise.
I apologize to Mark. He was behind my little box of list of participants.
All right, February 4th.
I believe we have Josh and Seth, right?
Yes, we're here.
Thank you. Go ahead, Seth.
All right, good. February 4th, 2021 meeting of the Utility Billing Review Ad Hoc and Advisory Committee is called to order. Attending is the entire committee. I see Julie Ward in. The entire committee is present here, as well as several guests. John and Josh are working the audiovisual. First item of business is approving the February 1st, 21 minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the February 1st minutes?
I have a couple of notes. I'm sorry. Do you want those now?
Let's do a motion to approve first.
Okay.
I'll move to approve.
Motion to approve.
All right, Jimmy's moved to approve, and then kind of a second, please.
This is Julie Ward. I'll second.
I think I heard a second there. Okay, so for discussion, if there are any changes or upgrades to the minutes, let's have it.
I do. Under item number 5, the 3 additional committee members that you appointed. I believe the first one for Ralph King should be technical subject matter expert SME. Patrick O'Day's we called scope. And Julie Ward's, I think, should read something financial support regarding recommendations.
All those sound good to me.
That's all I have.
Anyone else have comments on the minutes? Jennifer, I'm sorry, I see your mic on.
Yes, it should be. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, if there are no additional comments on the minutes, all in favor indicate aye, or by raising your hand on the chat.
Aye.
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 Any nays? Okay, I'm seeing unanimous approval of that. Denise?
That's correct. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Roll call looks like everybody's here, and I certainly do appreciate it. I'd like to make sure we use effective time for all of us, especially for Ralph Tellis, because the rest of us are sort of kind of volunteers around here. I'd like to give Mayor Cole a couple, 3 minutes to do his mayor moment to kind of level set us and keep us on track. So Kevin, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, fast and furious day in the city of Pearland. If you've noticed, we've got a pod going on with vaccines, so it's been kind of crazy. Crazy day. It's been a crazy few weeks getting this thing up and going and running, and the hardest part for me was keeping it quiet. So anyway, with that, first off, thanks everybody again. This is yeoman's work. As we've stated before, this is a working group, and just really want to get into getting this accomplished and done. Thank each one of you for your work. I want to remind the committee that council is waiting for your responses to some of these recommendations. And we certainly, and I know the last meeting was the first meeting that you had the opportunity to kind of get your legs under you and get your own housekeeping, items in order. But certainly the council is going to be looking for your recommendations sooner rather than later. I did share with Denise earlier today that the way I envision it is if you guys could dispense, for example, on your agenda tonight, if you got one that item 2A, all of those done, for example, that would be a write-up coming to us. If you change anything, or if you keep it as is, whatever, that would come to us, and then we could get that slated to move forward to the council sooner rather than later. It did concern me a little bit because, we really want to make sure that we don't get bogged down too much, especially with items like the 3230 plan sitting out there that's going to get into the weeds a little bit. That's going to have a budget and financial implication for the council, and I want to make sure that the council has time to do their own arm wrestling, if you will, with that issue and do it justice before moving on. So just keep up the work. I do want to let the committee know that Mr. McCarter is going to be moving on. He has accepted a position in Michigan as a deputy city manager. And that's towards the end of the month, and I'll let him, talk about that if he cares to. But that certainly will impact this group's work a little bit. But we will figure all that out and keep going. So, but I wanted to inform the group of that just so you're aware in the background that's working through. So with that, I'm going to be kind of on and off this call a little bit for the next or however long you're going to be here. I do have an event tonight that I'll have to cut out for, but we're trying to get a letter into the state pushing for more vaccines. So I'll beg forgiveness for not being totally on the call the whole time. So with that, I'll turn it over to you guys and look forward to more to come.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for all your work on the vaccine and everything else you're doing. John, wow, it's still snowing up there, right?
It is still snowing up there. Yeah, so I'm going to be leaving. My last day with the city is at February 26th, so the last day in February. As Mr. Mayor mentioned, it's a move for me to deputy city manager. It's a city called Wyoming, Michigan, immediately south of Grand Rapids. Kind of a long planned move for me. My wife's from Iowa. I'm from Michigan originally, and we welcomed our first son into the world in July, and we're moving to where the support system is, and we'll miss everybody here in Pearland. And it's been my great honor to serve in this interim role. But we got interviews next week for the permanent person. I'm confident they'll be here, and I'll be with this committee right up until my last day. So I'll be here supporting, and there's a great team here to kind of take the baton and run with it. So more work to come.
Best wishes. Best wishes from all of us.
Congratulations, John.
And it's something about those grandbabies. When they land, they're supposed to be near their grandmas. So I just kind of want to level set us all. We're going to try something. We're going to try a little bit of time boxing, nothing formal. I'm going to try to do some timekeeping off, but next agenda, I'd like to time box us. I definitely would like to spend the next, 30 minutes, 40 minutes with Rolf Tellis speaking. I'm not sure if you have a copy of the agenda, but up on the screen, you'll see recommendation 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 13, 15. And I'm going to drag up at the bottom behind 15, the 3230 plan, recommendation 6. What we're looking for from Rolf Tellis is some background, lift the hood, let us look, give us your experience, give us the knowledge, give us your recommendation. I know you did that, but kind of flesh it out for us so that we're a little bit wiser. And so I hope this didn't catch you flat-footed. If it did, I apologize for that. Seth, do you want to take the lead on this?
Yeah, thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to talk and present with the committee. And I think we can answer, certainly any questions that you have. I'll give you sort of the high-level synopsis of sort of our inquiry into the 3230 plan. And as you see, there's a few choices that you have, and really these are all policy questions because this is a fairly unusual occurrence. In all the utilities that we work with, which is well over 1,000 across the United States, it's very rare to have these type of discrepancies go on for such a long period of time. For short periods, yes, they do exist, but for longer periods, that's fairly unusual. And really, to summarize where the recommendations were in terms of options, the first option would be to simply write off the amount of consumption. The term arrears has been used, but I think more appropriately is the unbilled consumption. And I think we have to think about how this unbilled consumption has been collected over the time period. And that really has been a couple of days per billing period over a long period of time. So when you're thinking about, the value of that, you're thinking about how it was accumulated. Think about rate structures, think about what the impact was on individual citizens, and this sort of frames some of our recommendations. So again, the first sort of option that you have is simply writing off that. It will have obviously a material impact to your financial statements. I guess the key question with that would be, what would that impact be in terms of future rate increases? What does that reflect with your current budget? And also simplicity and execution for staff. How easy or difficult is that for staff to implement as well too? And then finally, what is the impact on customers of being able to align the billing a little bit more closely with the metering in the near future? Sort of the second option we looked at was converting the amount of consumption right now to a RIA figure, to an actual financial figure, and then billing that as a partial payment structure. A couple of challenges with that as you look at that is, what is the basis for that conversion? As I just mentioned, accumulating that amount of consumption over time was done under different tiers in the rate structure. So billing that out, would you bill it at a lower tier? Would you bill it at a series of tiers? How do you include base charges in those? Those are all kind of questions on how to calculate that amount of money if you're going to change that consumption into some type of cash value that then you could bill. Then, of course, the option is to simply do a calculation, bill it all as a one-time charge, and then have some people pay that off or allow them to pay that down over time. That is an option. Then, of course, the 3230 plan is another option. So I think with that, that's sort of the high-level view. We can go into nuances on any single one of those options, but I think probably the more appropriate thing would be just to sort of take questions, if you have any, on each of those different options and sort of our assessment.
I'm sorry, I may have led you astray a little bit. I wanted to start with recommendation number 1 and behind 15 do 3230.
Okay.
So if we could just, team, if we could just hold our questions on 3230, because I want to give you as much time on 3230 and not cram it into this 30 minutes.
Well, what can I help you with on recommendation 1? Would you like some more detail on sort of the engagement and continue?
Absolutely. We'd like to understand the depth and breadth of these. How prevalent is the culture that needs to, I think it's beyond utility billing. I don't know what that means. So for us to say, yes, we're fine with this recommendation, it all looks to be within inside utility billing. And are we correct in that assumption? So we're really asking you to lift the hood and talk to us about your engagement.
Yeah, well, first I have to caution, our assessment wasn't sort of a forensic audit or a forensic assessment. Although in reading of the Olson report and talking with staff, We learned from staff that under sort of the previous organization and a sort of a long-held cultural norm within billing was to sort of focus in on whatever task that you were focused in on and to receive direction and to really stay within your box as it may be. And I think that was perhaps one of the ways that led to the issues with the billing alignment issue. And really what we're looking for, what we suggested in the culture piece here, is to make staff much more engaged with the process, to allow them to communicate with the different groups, the utility billing group, as well as the group in meter services, to make that communication much more frequent and to make it much stronger, especially at the field staff level. Now, as you saw in the response from the staff has already done a lot of these things. I think bringing in Nancy and a lot of the other senior managers within that group has helped tremendously. But as we note in there, these folks are all new. They're trying to reform the culture. And our recommendation is really based around the culture of engaging more of the staff at the line level, making them feel comfortable with able to point out issues that they see, so that billing issues and issues that impact customers really get noticed a lot quicker in the future.
Any quick questions from the team?
Real fast. So basically, this number one goes with the document that John put up onto the website, correct? It shows what's being done already. It kind of shows what I assume like a survey that was done of the department of what they agreed, how they felt like they were in June of 2020 compared to how they felt like they were in November of 2020. It looks like there's progress being made there. And that has all the steps set forth, I think, that covers everything in number one, kind of what we were talking about last time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I want to reinforce the fact that, the staff has changed over, especially at the management level. A lot has been done. So there's a lot of work being done right now to sort of improve on the culture that existed in the past.
A question that I have, Seth, is do you, not to take anything away from all the effort or the effort to be done internally, but do you think it would be helpful for them to have some outside change management or access to some user groups or some, I don't know, even if they're doing conferences anymore, they may be doing them all online, but to give them some outside views so that they're not just utilizing what they personally know and maybe look for some best practices?
That's absolutely a great recommendation. It's something we touch on in our report as well, too. Users of the New World billing system, making sure you're talking with others, because as we know, and I don't know if this was brought up with the committee already, a lot of the billing systems have flaws and issues with them, and workarounds are required. There's customization that goes on at every utility, so talking with other users is very important. Learning what industry best practices are certainly very important. And a lot of that stuff was not going on as much in the past as is going on now with Nancy and the new crew that's in there.
Hey, Seth, got a question on that statement. If we're talking about recommendation one and culture of engagement, continuous improvement, how would that translate into improved culture and getting rid of the be quiet, do your job? Is there a link? Because what I heard was more of are there other outside sources to help with that aspect? And that's something I would certainly.
Yeah, I think there's two pieces to that. One is, I think, having more discussion at the staff level between meter services and the utility billing would help identify and recognize errors, and I think allow people to talk about different issues. And a lot of that, again, is ongoing right now. But in the previous regime, there wasn't as much of that as there probably needed to be. And I think just exposure to people outside of the city and what they're doing would give people comfort to spot things that were wrong or spot things that were not best practices and bring those to people's attention. If you don't have any exposure to really what best practices are, I think you feel a little bit more reluctant to put your hand up and say, I see something amiss.
All right. So the cultural concerns you've identified, it's strictly within that group, or is it more organizational?
Yeah, we looked strictly within the utility meter to cash process, so meter services and utility billing. We did not go outside of sort of general city government, that type of thing.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
One thing that
we could do.
Yep. Oh, yeah. So one thing that I noticed in the document that in terms of the culture change that was provided, and then also I noticed in the report in particular, one thing that seems to be lacking or wasn't specifically called out, and maybe it's rolled into one of the other general discussions, and that is the concept that every customer client interaction is an opportunity for improvement in problem solving. Mm-hmm. And what seems to be missing, and I'm going from the feedback from the citizens, is that when there is a problem, it's okay, we're going to fix it fast, reluctantly maybe in some ways, and then move on. And there's not the thought process of continuous improvement is not included within the interaction with the citizens and with the account holder. So where would that be specifically in your recommendations?
Yeah, I think we cover that in sort of the process improvement process. We do talk about engagement with citizens, and I think I'll give you an example of that and how things are changing. I think in the past there was a reaction to some customer inquiries about high meter readings that we'll send somebody out there, we'll take a look at it, but it's probably a leak on your property. And that may be the case. It may be a leak, but I think there's a lot of things that can be done to look at other things before automatically jumping to that. And I think Nancy and her group are looking at other things and they're revamping that process. And that's, again, part of process improvement, I think, is built in with that continuous improvement question.
I think I saw that in one of the reports, Seth, from what they posted. I think it was Joshua. It was prepared by Nancy, where it says on some of the processes from your guys' recommendation, where they're saying new internal processes have been implemented to ensure customer concerns are processed effectively. And it goes into more detail how they're doing the standardized chains of commands, and they're trying to get the staff to be more customer, effective on that. So I think from their meetings, they've acknowledged that.
Yeah, it's just that I noticed that specifically in their guidance document, not so much in the meeting notice, but in terms of here's what culture we're trying to build. What was missing in that is that the customer interaction is an opportunity for improvement.
Right, and I think Jennifer's saying, she was referring to the 2 updates that they had given to council, and I think that they're aligned and moving well. Might be worthwhile to take those just to kind of satisfy that question. Do we have anything more on recommendation number 1? Okay, Seth, can we move to 2?
Yeah, of course.
It's on the KPIs.
Yeah, and I think our emphasis here was there are a whole slew of new performance measures that are being tracked. Our emphasis here was to really track on things that were important to either performance within the organization or number 2, that were important to customers. The type of interactions that were happening, where individual errors were occurring, and where there were perhaps some process issues that needed to be addressed. And there's been a lot of work in this area. This is why this is one of the agreed, already underway recommendations. But I think like we've seen in other successful utilities, publishing and really keeping track of these key performance measures is what we were going at with this recommendation.
Thank you. Any questions from the team?
Hey, Seth, is there any industry resource where utility KPIs are discussed? Yeah, hey, what's the new technology? What new KPIs are there that the City of Pearland utility billing could maybe tune into? So as technology and things change, they can be up to date and kind of on the leading edge?
As far as utility sort of best practices, there's a couple of resources. We often use the AWWA Guide to Performance Benchmarking. And that has some statistics in it about, average wait time, number of dropped calls, a lot of call center performance type metrics, billing accuracy data, all of those are in the report. So, and that's collected for a couple hundred different utilities across the country. So if you're interested in those individual benchmarks, that's a really good source for those.
Yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of associations, maybe associations of cities that run municipal utility services that, periodic meetings discussing new metering technologies. I don't know if there's anything like that.
Yeah, I think there's several groups. Obviously the AWWA has a customer service group that's all they focus in and also on customer service and customer service standards. That's a good source. I think as we talked about before, the user groups from Tyler Technologies, from New World, is another good source as well too. Your meter vendor that you have, an AMI vendor, has user groups as well too. I think all of those sources are places you should have a presence in and be understanding implementation challenges, issues folks are having, and how are those being resolved.
Thank you, Seth. I guess, John, on page 17, Raftellus gives a table 6 of recommended KPIs. And the ones that we have on the website right now are kind of like a prior year to current year. How are we doing at calls? How are we doing it in revenue? That sort of thing. Are you moving more toward performance-based as well?
Yes, absolutely. So we've already dug into those performance measures and are looking through, really kind of prioritizing which ones we want to put first, and how we want to integrate those into our performance evaluations for staff, and then just looking as a functional unit as well. I used to work in a call center, and they judge you based on how quick you got the customer off the phone and how many times you transferred them to somebody else. And that's not how we want to work, and that's not what Raftellus put forward either. But we want to make sure we're putting thought into, especially those call center measures, because we want to make sure that they're well thought through. So yes, we are working through those, and yes, they will be integrated into what's put out there currently. So that would be a work in progress, if you will.
Thank you.
Mr. McCarter, is there any way that y'all's ideas and kind of what you're working on and what y'all see as the priorities can be shared with this group?
In relation to the performance measures in particular?
Yes, sir.
I'm sure we could put something together. We were thinking eventually to have kind of a response to all those measures. It's just some priorities have come up, but we could put something together for a future meeting if that's what you're looking for. Just kind of a response or our thoughts on each one of those and the prioritization. That won't be an issue.
On direction.
One thought that I had to share, Denise, is that since culture is really hard to measure, and we talked about that in recommendation 1, and the concept of performance measures and KPIs is to measure desired performance or behavior, that maybe the KPI associated with the culture advancement is a quarterly or semi-annual report back to the committee in the context of continuous improvement, which is discussed later in the report. If it's important to council that we repair the sense of trust between the community as a consequence of these developments, then it should be important for them to ask staff to ask for updates on some frequency. And so maybe that's an extra component to the KPIs that, although it's not so tangible, could round out the measurement of culture.
If I could just get my mute button. That's a good idea. I made note of that. Thank you. Any other on recommendation number 2? If not, Seth, can we move to 3, please?
Yeah, and again, this is another one where a lot of work has been done recently by Nancy and John and their team on updating standard operating procedures. One of the things that we stressed in the report and talked with them about is, building customer trust is related to making sure you get the same answer every time and things are handled the same way every time when you call in. And I know Nancy's been working in her team on scripting and making sure that people are getting the same response. The other factor with this is, with New World system and the changes with AMI being implemented, these standard operating procedures are being changed regularly. So they need to have a process for continually updating those and making sure there's consistency across the organization. So really that's what this recommendation was tailored to.
Thank you. Questions from anyone?
I actually had a question. I saw that the SOPs are being worked on and that Miss Dara Ing is the person leading that up. I was curious if she could share any, kind of experience with SOPs. I looked at the sample one that was attached and I thought I'd seen Raf tell us indicating in their report, it's good to have, that good organizations rely on lots of one-page SOPs, and I'm just wondering, I saw what was put together that we were sent. Is there her experience developing SOPs, and then is she going to take that SOP that has great detail, but maybe is each one going to have a single-page flow chart so the staff member that looks at it follows the flow chart, and if they got a question about an item, they flip to the page?
Hi, Jimmy. This is Dara. I have been working on the SOPs and making sure that it is as thorough as possible. And before I send it out to make sure that it is a new process, I do have a few of the employees go over their regular process, make sure they vet through it, and make sure that the process is familiar and something that is nothing new to them. And also to provide me any suggestions that they may have on the SOPs. So not only am I going through the process and making sure that the process is aligned to our policy, but I'm also making sure that I communicate with this staff here and to make sure that all the process is up to date, is familiar, and that everyone will have their questions answered before it's actually put out. I hope that answers your question.
It does, but a question as a follow-up for a new employee who isn't familiar with your current processes. I was kind of wondering, is there any, and if C's not going to do it, it's okay, it's y'all's call. Is there any intent or plan to have it's really thorough and has awesome information, but let's have a single page, almost a flow chart? Because I noted that they specifically referenced organizations having lots of single page. Bottom of page 21, high performing utilities often rely on collections of single-page process reference diagrams to remind staff about how to perform a process. So I see that, I think, flow chart. So I was just wondering if there was any, at any point, will that be incorporated? So you have the flow chart, and if they have questions about a step, they flip to the details.
Okay, I understand. Sorry for the confusion there. Yes, right now, as I'm updating the SOPs, I have found that there are more SOPs out of the 32 that was stated we currently have for CSRs, which means that in the process of making sure that I update, create more SOPs, once I weave everything together, there will be a flow chart that's going to be one page, and it would help a person getting on board who is a new hire to be familiar with the process and know where to go from there, something that would start them off, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, sort of, if I could expand on that a little bit. I mean, the idea, and Dara, we talked about this, is to basically have cheat sheets for the folks on the phone so that when they're talking with a customer, if they run into trouble or have issues, that the cheat sheet will sort of direct them where to go and get more information on that. So to sort of streamline the process.
I can jump in real quick too and just add to what Dara said. She's being modest. She's kind of in the middle of a really widespread revamp of all of our SOPs. They initially were first compiled, I think probably 4 or 5 years ago by someone who's no longer with the organization, but they were in a big binder, kind of old school, and Dara is in the process not only of putting them into a standard template along the lines of what Seth and his crew at Raptelis recommended, but also uploading those into SharePoint. We're relatively new to the SharePoint game here in Pearland, but Dara is in the middle of creating what's called a knowledge center. So it's just all the training documentation in one place. And the benefit of SharePoint, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is on these different documents and guides, you can add tags to them. So if somebody wanted, a high bill one page, or they could type in a high bill and it's going to come up with all the documents that we have for CSRs or billing specialists, frankly, on how to deal with high bill calls. It's about, absolutely making that information simpler and easier to access, as Mr. Davis hits on with the one pagers, but also getting to the information, everyone knowing where it is. So it's a huge effort, and Dara's done a ton of good work on it thus far, and lots of work ahead too.
Okay, great. I appreciate that, and give her a raise.
I second that. Okay, if there are no more questions on 3.
I've got one comment there, Denise. I'm sorry, I've been holding that a little bit, and I apologize if this is redundant. And John, as a favor, if it's your screen that's sharing, would you mind zooming in a little bit? I'm trying to juggle a couple of different documents, and I'm using your screen share to follow along a little bit. I appreciate it. For me, going back to something I mentioned at the last meeting, I think the combination of culture, KPI, and SOPs ends up being your system of management to whatever the norm is going to be after that is all change management, right? So I personally would add that I think there's got to be some treatment of that that's documented in the carry forward, and SOPs is maybe one place to do so. And I'd love to hear from Seth at Raptelis if you feel like that's dealt with somewhere else, which I'm fine with.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I would add one more thing into your list as well too, and that's the training piece with the SOPs and everything. And really, all of these recommendations are meant to sort of work together. So, if you can look at it more broadly, having people trained on the SOPs, having them engaged, having them involved in the culture will help them deal with this dynamic environment. Hopefully it came through in the report that over the next period of time, 6 months, a year, 2 years, depending on how long and whether or not you go with the 3230 plan, there's going to be a series of major changes that occur. Adopting AMI is going to require a major change. Certainly dealing with 3230 or one of the equivalents would involve a major change, and that's going to involve updating SOPs. That's going to involve some training. That's going to involve all those pieces. which is going to make for a pretty dynamic environment. And the only way I think the group is going to be successful is if all the folks in the organization are very engaged and very trained. So if something gets missed, they can raise their hand up and say, we missed this. We need to include this in the process.
And that's why I'll just reiterate, I can't preach strong enough about user groups, because that's really a font of information for them, lessons learned, and people that have gone through it, going through it, planning to go through it. So I just think that's an invaluable.
I'd like to reflect just a little bit on what Steve said. From the standpoint is the list of SOPs that are generated currently, there is no management of change SOP. And if you're going to go through full AMI implementation with all of the challenges that you're set today, management of change and predicting, so there are no unintended consequences. There should be a full knowledge. Go in with the decision with your eyes wide open that this is what the simulation shows, and here's what's going to happen 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now. And just as important, what are the resources? What are the potential pitfalls, both good and bad, that can occur? And is that been accounted for in the decision making as you go forward? There are processes that are utilized to do that. And clearly, and is reflected in your report, I mean, we had a perfect storm, right? I mean, we changed meters technology, we changed billing software, we changed transmission data protocols, and we've had a complete staff turnover. And the point to make is those kind of challenges can be anticipated to some extent. And one point to make, especially in terms of the 3230 plan, if you'd had a management of change SOP, you should have known the implications of the decision you were making. Right. And I'll agree with Steve, you know, that and this is not just in water billing and utilities. It has a lot of things to do citywide. In industry, where people's lives are decided based upon whether we do something safely and correctly and follow the codes and standards, we have a management of change procedure system. And we implement that system to ensure that we make the right decisions and we don't take risks that we don't need to take. And the point to make is there needs to be some kind of equivalent here.
Right. I agree. From my point of view, I look at this as I haven't seen any risk analysis. We're working on SOPs. We don't have necessarily the documentation that we need because our processes are not when AMI comes up. So there's really no identification of gaps, right? So, I mean, there's a lot. And I think change management is something that they can bring into the everyday life that would save them maybe some heartburn down the road. Any other questions on 3? If not, can we move to 4?
Just one follow on there, Denise. And Seth, look, I appreciate, this is hard because this is contextual, right? But I appreciate after all the discussions that we've had and hearing your commentary both at council meeting and in the last couple of meetings, the interrelationship of these recommendations. And I think a reader is not necessarily going to understand that, maybe unless they're saturated, or maybe I didn't read it that well, you know, from the get. But I think maybe a preface statement that comes across either from city staff that says basically just what you verbalized. This is intended to work in a kind of interdependent relationship with each other. To Ralph's point, in a lot of cases, a management of change SOP is enough to create a culture in and of itself. And we've seen a lot of that in industry, basically, is that changes the way that people think about their rights and their permissions, so to speak, to challenge management when they see something different than it used to be. And they kind of work together in a backwards effect. You don't state the culture and then develop SOPs in a in a tiered fashion, it works the other way around too. And so I think some contextual explanation as we think about how these changes are going to be communicated to the citizenry in general would be really helpful. And I would reiterate basically the words you used when you just described it now. Thanks, Denise.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. Anyone else? All right, rocking along to 4, Seth.
Can't hear you, Seth.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, Denise, you touched on the user group piece. I think there's a lot of different pieces of training that are very important. We talked about a lot of sort of scenario planning and sort of role planning. Scripting is very important as well too. So, really enhancing the amount of training that is being done within the group. I know a lot of that is now underway. But really moving that forward and making sure that they understand what the new pieces need to be to implement AMI and other things.
Would it be helpful to maybe do a site visit? I mean, there's a lot of call centers in town, right? I mean, some big ones that would, I know that when you bring change to people, and that staff is undergoing a lot. And if some of them in the who are the boots on the ground positions may have been there for a long time, they're trying to change their culture. They're trying to, work with this new idea of moving to AMI. And sometimes that stress makes them pull back a little bit because they can't see the reward. And if maybe they could do a site visit to a call center that they go, I got it. Now I understand these KPIs that they want to move to. Now I see where we're going, as opposed to just blindly following and not truly having a buy-in to it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, any kind of outside exposure you can get, I think is good. I think the city has been very wise to hire people like Nancy and others that have call center training and have exposure in other organizations. So they're bringing that knowledge and experience in with them. And I know, Nancy, you're on the phone with us here, but I mean, my analogy is kind of, you were given a lump of clay when you walked in, and you're now still trying to form that lump of clay. You've got a lot of new managers, a lot of new people, and that's an ongoing process.
Yes, it is. And I can echo on that. You talked about experience. I've been to user groups before, Denise, and I agree with you. You get so much information out of your user groups. And I'm hoping that with COVID, and if we can go to the wayside, or we can actually have more of these, we'll have to go to online. But I do agree with you that type of interaction you have with others is very beneficial. We have something that's already been set up and been part of, which is the utility billing managers in this area. And we actually, work together on different aspects of what our jobs are and what we do. Dara brings to the table the call center experience from the city of Houston. And how that all worked, in my experience with the billing background of two different cities, as well as an AMI transition and so forth. We're very fortunate to have that background. So we'll continue doing these things and continue bringing this in forward. And I agree with you that user groups would be one of the ways to go to, as well as training.
Any other comments or questions? All right, well, let's head out to number 7, synchronizing meter reading and billing cycles.
This one could be a long one, but I think everybody kind of on the call appreciates the fact that there's a lot of confusion created because there's not an alignment with the meter readings and the billing cycle. If somebody calls in and wants to know or is looking at their bill and wants to sort of equate that back to what they've done, there's a lag between when the bill has been, or the billing period and recent meter history. And I think what creates even more challenges is if, there's a suspected leak or issues with the property. You can send somebody out to pull the meter to get the data, but it's not necessarily for the same period as the billing cycle period, which creates a lot of confusion. So this sort of, again, touches back to our thoughts on, write-off or doing a conversion to cash on the consumption that has not been billed, and trying to synchronize back the meter readings again with the billing cycle to make it less confusing for both the staff and for people out in the public to understand the usage patterns.
From a just general experience for the other utilities and other municipalities, what's the average time between between meter read and billing?
They usually try to have it be about less than a week.
And recognizing we got a 40-day data limit, that would be in alignment with providing the bill within the data provided as a meter back, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially when you're doing radio read. Once you get to the AMI process, I would be expecting it would be a matter of days, 2 or 3 days to turn around a reading cycle.
Okay.
This says that it's in the group of underway. Can I get an understanding of how that's classified in this group, that there's work already being done?
I can field that, and then Seth can correct me if I'm wrong. But, for us, this is the recommendation after, figuring out an alternative to 3230. 3230 is synchronizing the meter and billing cycles. It's just doing it over a number of years. So that's what we took as underway. So it's happening incrementally, but it is happening through 3230. Getting back to that ideal point Seth pointed out, about a week.
Okay, so it's not in anticipation of 3230 terminating, and what's it look like in the future?
No. I'm sorry, I'm having mic problems over here. No, obviously if 3230 were to terminate or some alternative would happen, this would still happen. It would just happen in a different format. So our underway would be a different path forward.
And then there's the whole thought of AMI. Does that give you some leverage, functionality to leverage that as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, that significantly shortens the amount of time that it takes for us to go get those meter reads. That 40-day limit that Mr. King mentioned is out the window with AMI. We have longer data that we can get. So yeah, there's a lot more functionality there with AMI.
I thought maybe you guys were working magic back there. Any other questions on 7?
Mr. McCarter, maybe I misunderstood. It sounded like you said once we have AMI, the 40-day limit is out the window.
Is that right, Nancy? I thought we could get more than 40 days through the AMI.
That's what I thought you said.
Once AMI comes up on board, we'll have more back history on it. So that was something that we were looking at when we had that underway or going under consideration with that, just like Mr. McCarter was saying. Right now, we are limited for drive-by only having 40 days worth of data that's on the endpoints.
Okay, so it's possible that when AMI is implemented, the city may have an SOP that every so many days you pull that hourly consumption and you keep a much larger running.
You're going to real time. You're going to real time that, aren't you?
Yeah, I think that might warrant some further discussion with our IT department about what that looks like, just with the mass of data. But yes, and I don't want to speak out of turn about what that would look like and how that's housed and everything. But yes,
of course.
I agree with Mr. McCarter. It would be better to have that, on for discussion with the IT and with the meter people as well.
Denise, I have just a quick comment on this one. I think, again, contextually here, I think this recommendation is somewhat aligned with recommendation number 5, which we'll talk about at some point in the future. as there's a significant communication aspect to this alignment of meter reading and the finance, so to speak, because there's an expectation that gets set for the user. And I think it's a big part of the user understanding why a lapse in time period between read and bill should even matter to me to begin with, and all the communication aspects of that, right? So I'm going to forward to the group. I get a weekly email from my electricity provider, which is Just Energy. And that weekly update interconnects my meter read with my expected bill at the end of the month. And I receive it weekly. And it's done an incredible job changing my perception of what I'm going to be spending for my electricity bill that month, so to speak. So I would offer this as kind of an endpoint in process of that interconnection of meter read with money, and maybe a best practice in terms of communicating this to the user. So kind of linking number 7 with number 5 and how that's done, because it's been very meaningful for me. So I would use this as an example with your provider to say, hey, can you get to this point eventually, and how do we do it?
And I think there's one thing, and these are interacted a little bit, but the challenge that we have with what's going on the meter front, and the perception and potentially fact that some meters read high, have an error. If we're going to detect that high reading before they get a $1,000 bill and resolve it before it gets to that point, we have to get these in synchronous, and we have to get the data within a few days, as long as we're within that 40-day data problem. Now, if we go to AMI and we do that continuously and it's being loaded in a database that any client or customer can look at, the things get a little better. But the point I make is this is highly interacted with the root cause of tracking meter issues. And if we can't get this resolved, tracking meter issues is almost mission impossible, because you can't do it 2 months behind.
Yeah, I would just add on that, and I'm sure all of you that are customers of the system understand that, is even when you're having discussions with the billing staff, if you're trying to recall what happened 2-3 months ago, and then equate that with your bill, that becomes a little bit more challenging than being able to look at your bill and look back over the past month and understand what's happened.
Thank you, Seth. Any other questions? All right. 13, adjust staffing to reflect short-term needs and prepare for AMI implementation.
So this one is fairly significant on the meter services side of things. Right now, the process that's in place in terms of staffing on the meter services side is, when they get meter reading, they go out, they read the meter readings, it comes in to the utility billing staff, and then they run it through a process where it generates exceptions, basically high, low, read errors, other issues. And then based on those, work orders are sent to the meter services folks to go out and investigate these things. That whole process will change pretty significantly once AMI comes in, and this recommendation is sort of around that. What is going to happen, hopefully, with this process is the metering system will be giving near real-time information when meters are reading high, reading low, when there's a potential malfunction, and folks within meter services should be acting on those very quickly before it even reaches the billing system. So that's going to be a massive paradigm shift, and it's going to be a big shift for the staffing, and that's what's really captured in this recommendation.
Any questions? Nancy, looking at page 43, it looks like 5, maybe 6 additional positions. I'm not sure about that last dot, promoting lead billing specialist to billing supervisor, whether that would be a backfill on that position or not. Is this 5 or 6 additionals? the recommendation?
I'm sorry, Denise, was that directed to me?
Yes.
I don't have that up, and I apologize. I'm middle of a family emergency. May I direct that over to Mr. McCarter?
Absolutely.
Sure. So, can you repeat what page you're on, Ms. Hewitt? I'm sorry.
Can you hear me? My thing goes on and off.
Yes.
Okay. Nancy, if you're in the middle of a family emergency, John is quite capable. You don't have to do this. You know this. And I'm just going to speak for the whole team on that one. On page 43, recommendation 13, I was just trying to qualify whether that was 5 additional or 6 additionals. That last dot was promote lead billing specialist to billing supervisor, and whether you would backfill that billing specialist or not. I was just wondering how many total positions this was going to be.
So, okay, I'm there. I'm sorry. So we, a lot of these have already happened. So, some of these have. So the promoting lead billing specialist to billing supervisors already happened. And that was just a reclassification of a position, not a net add. We've already created 2 additional billing positions. So now we have 4 billing specialists, 1 for each cycle, and a billing supervisor. So a functional unit lead, 1 team that does billing. We filled the office assistant. That was just a position that had been vacant for a long time that we filled and got a good person in there. So it'd be 2 additional cashier positions to process voicemails and do that type of work. The CSR reclassification to a delinquency specialist would not be a net add. And then creating and filling a second delinquency specialist position would be a net add. So we're talking about a 3 additional FTEs and reclassification of 1.
Okay. And so you just have the first 2, adding 2 cashier positions. Is that all you have left open?
Yeah, those don't exist. That's just, we're looking out in the future and kind of what do we need? Yeah.
Okay.
I was just wondering why it's here for us to make comment to, because it's like 90% done, right?
They have not been funded to this point. So that was just when Nancy came on board, we basically said, hey, Nancy, take your 20 plus years of experience, take a look at what we're doing here, and what are the tools that you need to take us to the next level. And this is what she laid out. So the 2 cashiers would be something down the line that we would request. I would not classify those as an urgent need right now.
Okay. But out of that recommendation 13, we're really just talking about the first bullet that's left, right?
Yeah, and I think the recommendation, yeah. Yep.
Okay. Deal. Thank you. I'm sorry. Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I got a question for Raftelis. And I guess it'll be intertwined with Mr. McCarter. So 3 of the positions, if I'm understanding right, the second delinquency specialist, I guess, has been created and filled, and the 2 additional billing specialists, those have been filled, have been created and filled, if I understood you right. To Raftelis, are those head counts reflected in your staffing tables, or were those done before the positions filled?
Josh, I guess I would ask you to weigh in on this one. I don't believe that we counted any positions that were not authorized.
That's correct. The staffing tables reflect authorized positions at the beginning of each fiscal year. Really, what we're doing here in this recommendation is just sort of laying the context for some of the staffing discussions that had already occurred at the time we were writing. Really just to talk about how sort of here's what's happened and here's what staff say could potentially happen in the future. And just to bear in mind that as the AMI process unfolds, that will impact these discussions and these decisions.
Okay, so table 14, total staffing, total staff FTEs 26 and a half includes these positions they're talking about.
It would not include the cashiers or the
Yes,
second
but it includes
delinquency
the others.
specialist. Yes,
Oh,
sir.
I'm sorry, it doesn't include the cashiers or
the second delinquency specialist. We currently have one delinquency specialist with the city.
okay. All right, perfect. Thank you.
And I think it's worth adding that the bullets here, I think, came from a staff write-up. And Josh and Seth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think in recommendation 13 you're recommending adding staff.
No, that's correct. If you look at the sentence before those bullets, it references that water billing, the internal memo.
Any other
Mr.
questions?
McCarter, you said the second delinquency specialist hasn't been hired. It has been approved though, right?
No, it has not.
No.
We currently have 4 billing specialists and 1 delinquency specialist.
Okay.
So we don't have that second one.
Thank you for clarifying, sir.
Denise, I just wanted to add this. This was one where in my role on the committee, I have a real hard time kind of providing any opinion or comments because we've got a city governance system and we've got a city staff basically that they've got to figure out how to do what the citizens expect, and they're using smart things like benchmarks with other cities and providing context of what systems those cities are using and all that kind of stuff. So the only thing that I'd like to add to this, and I'm not sure this is the right place, basically, is that there needs to be a project plan context for staffing needs for the AMI implementation. And then lacking that, that's a management of change issue again. I mean, with lacking that project plan for the AMI, you really won't know what additional staff are needed or if you can reduce staff in that process. That's the key piece for me.
Right, correct. I agree. And I felt a little uncomfortable if there's 3 positions here that are unfunded, and if we go, yeah, we agree with number 13, did we just authorize the city 3 more positions with our agreement?
Yeah, and let me just clarify that if you read number 13 carefully, we're just making note that those positions were asked for in the memo. We're not endorsing those additional positions.
Absolutely. I understand that. It's just if you look at their customer count per FTE when compared to some others, that might be part of the sale for it. And I just want to make sure that we didn't endorse something without realizing what we were doing. Any other questions? All right, well, let's go to number 15, if you don't mind, Seth.
Yeah, and again, this one ties back to what we were just talking about with the AMI implementation piece of things. As you all know, the AMI is involving a lot of different departments in the city. There's an IT component, there's a public works component with the meter services, utility billing, obviously finance, other pieces. And that group really has to work seamlessly for this to be an important, to be a successful project. What we also make mention of this too is involving the junior staff and making sure that they have an opportunity to contribute and talk about all the different changes that are going to incur with this implementation plan. We also call out, and I'm glad we have Joshua Lee on the phone because the communication around this is also extremely important. And I know the city has done websites and sent out some material on this, but it's amazingly complicated, and ongoing continuous conversation about AMI and the process and when it's going to hit and what people can expect are imperative to making this a success.
Thank you, Seth. Any questions, comments? Okay, so I think we've covered, we're at 5:10. I think we've covered the first 7 appropriately. Is the team in agreement that we can move to some discussion the rest of the time on 30?
Denise, from a process perspective, it may make sense to pause a little bit and ask the team for comments on what would keep you individually and therefore what would keep the team from voting, so to speak, to support or reaffirm these recommendations with some of the additional comments and guidance that we have discussed.
You're right. I have it as a bullet point that overlooked the top. I looked right over the top of it.
So I'm inviting comments from team members regarding is there anything holding you back from being able to say, hey, I agree and support Ref Tellis and staff commentary and recommendations here for the set that we just discussed.
I think there's some caveats that I made note of, and we can kind of work that through if we do a white paper on this, but I see no reason to hold up this. I would just like to be able to add some comment to it.
Yeah, my only recommendation would be that we could approve it as is because most things are already in play. Just the council sets benchmarks to go ahead and review or for the staff to provide updates when it's got up to a certain time. You know, it could be it's this item, it's this item, so forth, however they overview what's going on and keep track of the improvements. And maybe report back to this board with what the improvements are so we can make sure that's what we want to stay on task.
I agree. I think I'm agreeable to, all of these items. And if they're, in the work, I'm good with keeping that ball rolling on these.
I agree with that too.
Sorry, Jennifer. Apologize.
Sorry. I was going to say, I agree too with what Patrick and Julie said, keeping the ball rolling, and that I agree with how everything was explained on the staff side and Ref Tellis.
Okay, I think, Denise, the process I'd recommend here, if you and the team agree, would be to take the caveats, as you call them, or the additional comments or the additional guidance, and to write those into a document. And then given that we've been through the recommendations in item 2A, and given that we don't have any dissension that's been noted thus far, we would vote on these actions or affirmation on these actions along with the comments that we write at our next meeting, and then pass that on to council. And that way we can fully vet and capture kind of the additions and the guidance that we discussed here, give everybody a chance to comment on it via the minutes, and actually move on the action at the next meeting. And by the way, Dara, I know you were involved in it, and John, I like the way that we developed kind of the decision matrix and such, and published that as part of the minutes. That makes a lot of sense to us. So that system seems to be working for, at least for me.
Okay, I'll take that as an action item.
Sounds good. And then Denise, I know that as you're making notes there, you interjected some checkpoints in your work process. We're at 5:16, having moved through item 2A. Would you like to recommend moving on to 2B and the discussions there? Or do you believe that we'd be better served to break and capture that on our next agenda?
I thought if we could spend some time on the on 3230. Maybe that would let us and maybe spend 15, 20 minutes and come back to the other recommendations with caveats. I just want to pull that 3230 forward on this one.
We've got a few more agenda items obviously down below as well. So, you know, we're planning to discuss the
open
you
meeting.
know, the item 4, which was the process to deal with things that are not captured in the RefTelis reports, the making these meetings accessible to the public in a live format, and then how to deal with information requests and resource requests that may demand money in order to proceed. So we've got those items as well to kind of budget in our remaining time.
What would you prefer to do?
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. That let's table the conversation on 2B. Let's have some intro with regards to 3230, given the importance of that. But let's leave. Let's spend about only 10 or 15 minutes on that, and then let's move to items 4, 5, and 6 to close the meeting, and that'll give us 30 minutes or so to deal with those items, and we can keep to our 2-hour planned limit.
Exactly. Okay, sounds like a plan. So Seth, 3230. I know you're going to be tired about talking about it, but it's going to be a really big decision for us. And I guess, you know, I just keep thinking, what's the story behind this story? And so you've kind of given us the overview that we've already read through, but if you, hypothetically speaking, please, if you were the consultant engaged to decide what to do with 3230, what are the gotchas? What are the stumbling blocks? What are the things that we need to make sure that we take into consideration while reviewing this?
Well, I'll give you a list. I think obviously, and this committee understands this very much, is what is easiest and most equitable for customers. You know, what can they understand? What is most equitable to them should be foremost in people's minds. I think also considering too, what are the implications to staff and how easy with their new world system and what they have, whatever you decide, how difficult or easy is it to implement? And we kept these in mind with our recommendations as well too. I think the third piece to look at is, you know, what are the financial implications? And I'm glad John's on the line here too, because looking at the various different options, if you were to write something off, how would that impact both current and future budgets is a very important consideration as well too. Is it something that would require an immediate rate increase, or is it something that would be able to be compensated with, you know, cash from, you know, reserves or other sources? I think those are probably the main areas that you really have to take a look at. Customer impact on staff and systems, and then number 3, what is the big financial impact of the various decisions?
Seth, on your write-up on option number 1, and I apologize, let me pull it up because I don't want to misread your words. Thought it said something to the effect that option 1, yes. I highlighted option 1, middle of the paragraph. It also provides the most expedient solution, carries almost no administrative burden to implement, and positions the city for future success. And then at the bottom of that page, and I'm looking on page 29 for anyone that has the actual report.
Thank you, Jimmy.
While this approach presents the simplest and most straightforward way to resolve unbilled consumption and close current billing gap, it does come with trade-offs. So from my what I looked at that and took away was this is probably the easiest way to address it. And can you give any input on how city council direction, when 3230 was officially adopted April 13th, 2020, and they told staff that go ahead, implement 3230, but by the time AMI was operational, they had to be able to tell people how much they owe and give them the option to pay it off. That was council's direction when they adopted it. So how does that directive and your analysis here of this being the most straightforward and least burdensome, is that still, would you see that as being the most logical option, especially if the city's going to be facing having to run 2 platforms? The potential of, you're going to have some customers that's going to pay what they owe, and they're going to have one billing system for them. And then you're going to have another group of customers that are on 3230, and then, future rate changes. I think that would be very complicated. And to me, it does seem that option 1 would be the most straightforward.
I think I would say in terms of straightforward, yeah, probably option 1 is the easiest. I think obviously I'm getting a lot of feedback. If somebody could go on mute, that might help out. So I think obviously option 1 is the most straightforward, but obviously the offset with that is at least $5 million of revenue that you're not collecting. So that's a huge trade-off that you have to make there. I can't speak for the staff, but certainly the simplest is probably appreciated by them. But that probably, if you were to go with that route, would accelerate the next need for a rate increase. It would, perhaps create a situation where you're cutting into, some of your reserves, and John can speak of that a little bit more as well too. I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned, and there's a lot of confusion around this, is, you've heard different figures talked about in terms of how much potential money is unbilled, and really it's not, I don't think, as straightforward as not knowing what the amount is. It's really more about how you calculate the amount. What tier the consumption is in. Do you include in base charges with that or not base charges? And depending on what assumptions you make, you can be all the way from 5 million up to 11 or 12 million dollars with that amount. So that comes into the discussion as well too, in terms of how much would the city potentially have to write off to adopt option 1.
My thoughts on this, Jimmy, thanks for the good questions. Mine were really similar. My thoughts on this are, in your approach to this, it's easy to consider pros and cons, which you're mentioning, obviously. But if, for example, council came out and said, hey, I want this done with by the end of calendar 2021, there's a lot of smart people involved here that could kind of in action after that come up with the best way to make this done with by the end of 2021. And my question to you is, do you agree with that? Do you think, in other words, the recommendations that you're writing here were similar to the recommendations that were made to council when the decision was made? And had the decision been made differently, in other words, I want this done with, what's the best way to do that? You think it would have been a different outcome?
I think it's certainly all about choices, is I guess the best way I can provide the answer to this. I'm not trying to be evasive, but I guess if you're prioritizing sort of expediency and simplicity, option 1 jumps to the top. If the priority is collection of revenue and trying to do that in the most the easiest way for customers, then perhaps 3230 is the best plan for doing that. And then obviously there's some other options. So it's really what the city council and the citizenry prioritize is important.
That was very evasive, Seth. Nice job.
One of the questions I have.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
If we get away from the 3230, what is the immediate? Do we have any idea what the average immediate bill change is? Obviously, that's what the homeowners are going to see. The residents are going to see is that what has changed in their bill. So if we decide to forgive it all, get rid of the 3230, then what do we do? Or what do they see?
Well, John can answer that, or perhaps Nancy as well too. But essentially, they'd see a bill for 30 days, so it wouldn't be a tremendous impact. They just would be missing probably 2 days worth of consumption.
About 7.14% consumption.
Yeah, and also worth adding, I mean, this is true in any monthly billing cycle. It'll vary depending on what the month is. So, in February, it's 28 days, and then January has 31 days. So it'll vary, but it will shrink. I think Mr. Davis hit it with the percentage there.
Seth, I got a question. Table 8, bottom of page 28, 5/8 inch meter. You have estimated average consumption charge per month, $36.27.
Mm-hmm.
How many, and then you have an estimated average daily consumption charge. Is that based on current numbers on a 3230 plan?
I guess I'll have to defer to Josh on that. I think that was based on the consumption records that we got. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We went to pull this data. We basically got, I believe it was like the last 18 months of data of actual bills, and all of those calculations are essentially running those numbers that we got as far as what was consumed and then what was billed, to estimate the average daily charges that someone would have paid during that 18-month window.
Okay, so you used
I'm sorry, it was from October. It's on page 28 there, from about halfway through the page, October 4th, 19 through November 9th, 2020. That was the time period we looked at.
I misread the date. I thought I saw 2020, October 2020, because I was saying that was 32 days. All right, that answers my math question there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that chart goes to a question I had, and it really kind of comes down to this: it's hard to make a decision unless you know what the actual number implications are. But, we keep talking about we're behind on billing, but also represent that the big users may represent a significant portion. Now, granted, yes, residentials times the numbers ends up being a large group, but the actual accounts that owe the most money, that would be the one that would get the biggest sticker shock, are the big users on the system. And so it'd be interesting to see what that distribution looks like in terms of who owes who back to the city. And that may play into a role as to how we adjust or what we propose to go forward.
Agreed. And again, clarification on this is I would refrain from talking about the money owed and talk about the consumption that hasn't been billed, because there is a difference. Because think about this: if you have a large commercial user, it's going to be billed at different tiers, and each of those tiers has a different cost to it. So making assumptions about what tiers they're building can have a profound effect on the amount of money that is owed. And depending on how you do the calculations, it can really change the amounts owed. I think to further complicate this and to give you something else to think about is, essentially, when these were accumulated over time, they were a partial amount of missed consumption every month. So there could be some assumptions with that, whether they were billed at a lower tier or a higher tier of consumption. In our opinion, it would not be fair to simply just apply the conventional billing structure on the amount owed, the total amount owed, because that would put a lot of folks into a higher consumption tier than they would have been billed for that consumption anyways, if that makes sense.
I just want to second your comments there, Ralph. I think that's a great and smart way to look at it here, because keeping things in scale is a really important part of what we're trying to accomplish here.
John, on page 29, the 4.9 or $5 million, were you guys involved in that calculation? Are you comfortable with that number?
So I would agree with the logic. I mean, logically, it makes sense to me. I think that when we talk about assigning a dollar value, it's important to keep in mind here that this was as of, I think, January 1. So that's a snapshot in time. We talk about that it changes a lot, and that the snapshot in time that's really going to matter is the year-end accrual, because that's when the actual difference is going to hit our books. So when we do our calculation and we get back with this committee, and that's an action item for us to put together one single calculation of what the unbilled usage is, we'll present that the year-end accrual. Because I think that's, Seth mentioned this as an actuarial estimation here, and logically it makes sense. But I think when we talk about making a decision on 3230, it's that accrual that's really going to matter. And so, yes, logically, this makes sense. No, we were not involved in the nuances of it, but we provided the data, and I think it makes sense the way they did it.
I'd like to recommend maybe that we kind of table additional discussion on 3230. Had some interesting points raised to maybe consider some additional information requests or just a spur thought. So if you and the committee agree, I'd like to move down to the three last agenda items, specifically item 4. Again, with respect to our planned timeline.
Hey, Steve, I do have one final request of Raf Tellis, and I guess maybe it was Josh. Josh, could you check in a future time, get back to us on the estimation that y'all had as of January 1, 58.25 days? Because I looked at the actual billing calendars, the 3230, and what I show on January 1, I see 63.75. So I just want to know, obviously that would have a significant impact. So
just out of curiosity,
if I'm missing something, and feel free to reach out to me.
Was that 63 for one billing cycle or across all billing cycles?
No, that was across all.
Okay, yeah, I'll be happy to look into it and double check.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions of Raf Tellis? Well, hearing none, you're more than welcome to stay if you'd like to turn into volunteers, Seth and Josh, but if not, you are free to go back to your normal programming.
Well, thank you very much. And as usual, you have our contact information, and we're available to participate going forward as well, too. So feel free to reach out on any of these matters that you need some more clarification.
Seth, Josh, this is Nancy. Would you reach out to me regarding the number that Mr. Davis gave you? I just want to verify that against what we have in our numbers.
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. All right. As our agenda allows, in context, we're going to skip down to item 4 and have a little bit of a discussion. I'm going to read the item: provide additional recommendations to the City Council as they apply to the utility billing system processes and infrastructure that may not be captured in the Raftellus report. And the only reason I want to bring this into discussion is because as we're learning to work on the committee and considering things like timeline and project plan, Denise had some thoughts that she wants to share maybe around this more freewheeling component of our charter. It's less structured, and we're going to be grabbing items that may come up in our conversation that don't necessarily fit one of the existing recommendations. So Denise has been spending some time developing some tools where if we have an item like this that pops up in discussion, we might capture it somehow and bring it up later. So Denise, do you want to comment on that as kind of your matrix evolves of the tools that you're planning to use here with us?
Sure. And while you were talking, I was busy taking my 64-year-old mind going, what did I say? I sent out today, and it's also attached to your minutes out on the website, the change control and the action log. So if I take an action, it goes on the action log with follow-up. The decision log, it is as we make decisions. And I think that's an opportunity for us to capture what the outlying things are that we think we need to discuss in relationship to this, and not just the Raftellus report, right? And this is in our charter as, I'm flipping my notebook, bear with me. Provide additional recommendations to council as they apply to the utility billing systems, process infrastructure. And infrastructure is then the meter, right? And that will not be captured in the Raftellus report. So let's, well, I just repeated that. I think it behooves us to spend some time thinking through what are those elements and how do we capture those and how do we move forth on them. I'm more than happy to document all of that for us, but I in no way, shape, or form have the slightest idea what all that encompasses. I know that this was brought up last week from Mr. King, and I've thought about it and thought about it and thought about it because that was how I was going to try to build some folders, and I still haven't thought quite enough, but I think it's a great launch pad for us of how we maybe look at things a little differently than what we may possibly have been looking at. Like Mr. King identified, we kind of talked about delayed billing, but high usage. What are some of those things, and how do we influence the determination on whether they're really meter issues, not meter issues? How do we talk about the water system reconciliation in relationship to the system as a whole? It's just sort of that whole thing to have some discussion around. Was that what you were expecting, Steve?
Yeah. So the action log, if you will, is going to serve to anything that we're kind of pushing to future work. And I'm used to using the term bucket list or something similar like that. If we decide that there's an item that comes up, it's not on today's agenda, but it's important to capture, the action log is a great opportunity for that. So my ask of the committee accordingly is, if you have an idea like that, whether during a meeting or afterwards, either bring it up in a meeting and note that, hey, Denise, could you put this on the action log as a future item to deal with? Or can you please send an email to Denise and UBCC and anybody else that you feel is relevant, including the designated SME, and say, hey, this is an item for the action log that I would like to treat on a future agenda. That'll give us an opportunity to capture these things and not lose them as we go about our 6 month or less work process here, and give importance to the ideas that you all have, which is an important component of this for me.
Yeah, my intent that straw man flow chart is at some point, and we've been focusing on getting Raftillis report items out of the way, and 3230 has to take precedent. But the issue in the primary citizen angst is the issue with high bills. And what I would suggest, and it's just an action item, I think we should put aside, and it would probably be one meeting, to spend time on trying to come up with what are the issues, what are the things that we're hearing and we know about and we suspect, as I attempted to do. And then the question is what's the best way to approach each one of those? And I would vote divide and conquer. And the point I make is there's certainly we've got a wealth of diverse experience and capabilities on the committee, and we've utilized that on an offline basis with working with the staff slightly, and then come back and report back to the committee and say, this is what we found, here's the information. And this is not uncommon for a complex root cause. And the challenge we have is the cause. The question here is what's the issue? And the issue is we have an issue with the citizens' concerns about their water bills. And as we saw in the report from last meeting, there's 300 and some odd people that saw a substantial increase. Is that real or Memorex? And it's a surprise to people, especially for that poor person that was at number one. It was over $1,000. So the question we got to work forward is what is the workflow process to do that? And I think we can spend literally one meeting after we get the 3230 decisions rolling as to what is all those different issues. And it's a root cause approach. It's a methodology. And I'm more than willing to lead that. And basically, we work on that flow chart together and we put things down and literally we try to organize it as we go, but we make sure that we're covering all the bases. Related to that, and this really comes back to a question of having staff help here. And that is what's the vision? When it's all said and done, where are we going to go? What does it look like? And the reason I bring the point is we can't identify everything that's a stumbling block or an impediment to that if we don't know where we're going. And that includes AMI. So that would be my recommendation. We spend some time just developing what are the issues, where are the pitfalls, where do we want to go, and what has to be in place to get there. Some of that is a AMI project. And so we're going to have to hear from the AMI project folks. What are you doing? Where's it going? How's it working? What's the configurations? Those kind of questions. And you're exactly right, Steve. It is going to be in the weeds. And there's some things that I've learned and seen, and there's some things that we're going to be able to accomplish, and there's some things we're not going to be able to accomplish. But what we need to do is set the path forward that for the things that take longer, where the city is in reality, what our infrastructure is in reality, is accounted for. And eventually, hopefully, those issues get resolved if there are issues. But we'll just have to see how that goes forward. Okay?
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. There's a lot there. Denise, I think it's worth noting for the action log that we talked about this previously. This definition of the endpoint or success or what does this look like is a joint set of goals probably shared by staff and council, and it's kind of a concurrent development. And of course, John, with your pending departure, you may have another representative come in and have a slightly different take on things, and want to add some goals to that and such, and that's normal. But I think it's worthwhile, as Ralph suggested, spending some time on that down the road so that we can begin to frame the deliverable under this, this item, which is the additional recommendations. Otherwise, it's going to be tough. And it's important to all of us, as Patrick stated, and I've stated, and such. This isn't our lives, unfortunately. We're we're spending the time we can. I think this will help us be wise and efficient with the time that we're contributing here.
Is there any update staff can give on where are we at a projected target for AMI? Is it something that 3 weeks from now they think we're going to be going live? Is there?
John, if you want me to, I could field that one. All the meters are installed, and they're putting the poles up, and we're looking to do a pilot area to see where we're to go ahead and look into that. But probably the best thing to do is to have that maybe addressed by somebody in the city, one of the staff members, such as maybe the director of engineering, Mr. Robert Upton, or something. So that could be something we can address in that case. So that way you can get a better time frame of what you're looking at.
When you're talking about poles, are those your takeout points for your comms?
Those are the ones. The poles are going up here. Denise, with the CGRs on them.
For the communication system?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so meters are done, comms almost done, and you're preparing for a pilot for communication of X number?
No, the poles, the comms are now, they're just now trying to put those into the ground. So that's what I'm saying. Probably the best thing to do is to for a time frame, I would bring in someone else to have that conversation that you're looking to have.
Hey, Miss Massey, I understand if you don't know the answer to this, but I think I've seen previously, I think 26 of the communication towers were already in the ground and waiting to be some stuff changed out, a CAM 3 module issue, and the other half was going to be going. Does that sound right? That maybe we already had half in the ground?
I apologize. Yeah, I would have to take a look at Mr. Upton's last report that was sent out.
Thank you.
Hey team, real quick, I'm about to jump off. I've got a event to be at. You guys have done a great job. Hey, keep your fingers crossed and pray for our community. I just made the request to the state about 25 minutes ago for a stand-up ongoing pod, and we've got some great support with Senator Taylor's office and others. So great work by everybody, and I've been keeping up with the conversation. Good stuff today. So I appreciate all your work, and we'll see you soon.
All right, Denise, if you don't mind, what I captured there, I think, was a request, a general request for either a project plan and timeline for AMI, or maybe we can deal with a quick overview by staff on a future agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
And I just wanted to make a little editorial comment. This action item, as we listed, is probably the most important thing, way more important than even 3230. So we've got to have to resolve what these ongoing issues are. And that's what's really got everybody upset. So.
Duly noted.
It's certainly one. Hey, Denise, as a suggestion on that, can we see about having Mr. Upton, if he's available for our next, whatever our next call is, to have him on it? Is that something we can ask the mayor to see if he's available?
We could absolutely do that.
All right, let's the committee doesn't mind, let's move to item 5 on the agenda. And Jimmy, I would ask you to introduce this one as it came from your request last meeting, making committee meetings accessible to the public. So we can take 5 minutes, 10 minutes or so to discuss pros and cons.
Yeah, and basically, and the reason I brought this up, when the committee rules were being adopted, when the agenda was first discussed, Councilman Hernandez and the mayor engaged in a dialogue about the agenda, the importance of knowing what was going on. As a resident listening, what I heard was it was really important that residents could know what was going on so they could follow along. And they talked about meetings where people would view, where they might attend in person. That's happened in the past, they said, and they fully expect it again. So that was kind of my expectation. When it was decided, that wasn't what was actually passed, but as we know, everything we say here is pushed out for the public. There's no any thought ideas we discuss, the public's going to know it. So from my vantage point, and I've had residents ask, why can't I watch in real time? If I have the availability, I would like to tune in and watch just like they do a council meeting. And considering everything we do and everything we say is available afterwards, I think in the spirit of transparency, it's a good idea to say, if you want to watch us, if you want to tune in at 4 o'clock and watch, tune in at 4 o'clock and watch, by all means. So that's kind of why, for me, the whole promoting transparency, there's nothing hidden. There's nothing we're going to say now that they're not going to hear. It's just it's giving them more access and being transparent.
Any other committee comments on it?
I think I have a few questions just on the logistics of that. I'm curious if there are any cost implications to the city to actually get it up live, and if there's ever a conflict with another city meeting that is required to be broadcast live, would both meetings be able to, would one be able to choose one meeting over the other? What are the logistics in making that happen?
Thank you, Josh.
Other questions, Julie?
I just have a comment. During city council meetings, the city council members are bombarded with text messages from citizens about whatever is being discussed. So I just wonder how much that would happen. And then secondly, how much that will influence our discussion at times. So that's my only thought, is that I know I don't want to sit here and have my text messages going crazy. So I would probably hide my phone, but that's my only concern. I know that that's what the council members go through. And that if we had an agreement that we just face down our phones or leave our phones or whatever so that we're not distracted and we can stay engaged. That's my only concern, because I think today went really well and we moved really fast. And I'd like to see each one of our meetings do this. That's all I have.
I would agree. The time issue is the big one for me. If exactly as you said, Denise, people are messaging or, whether it's texting or otherwise, just getting information to committee members throughout the meeting, I think it has the tendency to increase the time and possibly decrease our productivity.
I'm in agreement with that too. I would be afraid of the extra volume of text messages or other people voicing in, taken away from the time that we already have right now.
My vote is in that camp. I'm going to put it a little more simply. I didn't sign up for that. I didn't envision that we would have live meetings broadcast. I don't know exactly what I envisioned, but that wasn't it. I've spent my time on the council chair and second Denise's comment, and I know Kevin had to step out early, but he deals with it as we speak, and council has discussed this. I think it's important that as people, if we need to occasionally work on things that are work related while we're on this meeting, we need to be able to do that. I can't put my phone down during this meeting, and I want to be able to speak freely. And I think the notion that there's not a live session of this makes me feel more comfortable with that, regardless of the fact that people can view these comments unedited 2 or 3 days down the road.
Okay. All right.
Do we want to vote on that, Jim? Are you asking for a vote?
Well, it sounds like most of the committee is opposed to it. So I don't know if there needs to be a vote. I will say I'm disappointed, as Steve pointed out. Ralph, can you mute? I'm giving feedback, please. Thanks, sir. As Steve pointed out, yeah, if somebody's work goes off or whatever, you want to be able to take your phone and to pay attention to it. The same will happen with anyone here. I don't know how many residents have my cell phone number, so I'm really not concerned about their blowing my phone up. Oh, what about this or that? And the fact that most of us will say, well, we will turn our attention from here to deal with someone calling us anyhow. It does raise the concern with me, but at the end of the day, if the committee doesn't want the transparency, I understand.
I take exception to that, Jim. I don't think it has anything to do with whether or not we don't want transparency. The transparency is there. They get to see what's going on. There are committees in this for the city that do much more than what we do, who aren't even obligated to do a video. They're not obligated to open their meeting. I think we're being very transparent. We have documents out there. They can see our agenda ahead of time. They can see these videos. I take exception to the fact that that not by doing that would I be blocking transparency. I take exception to that.
Okay. My understanding when they were discussing setting it up is other ad hoc committees in the past they have been open to the public. So that
we can talk about the charter committee right now. We can talk about the charter committee. They changed the charter of the city, right?
That's not an ad hoc committee that wasn't appointed. But my understanding was they said that ad hoc committees in the past, they have been accessible to the public. But if the group doesn't want that, if we want to discuss something on a Monday and staff pushes it out Thursday morning and the resident sees it and says, there's something I want to take to my councilman and that might want to be on an agenda, well, it's too late. It's not getting on the agenda for Monday because they weren't able to see it. But
not much different than not much different than position. And it's not much different than the vote we gave a vote of confidence with notes on 7 recommendations, and we're not going to get it to council on time, right? I mean, that's going to be part of the beast of it, Jim.
Yeah, I think, we are publishing agendas in advance. If residents feel really strongly that, they have a voice, I think that we're all accessible. I can tell you that my cell phone is plastered everywhere because I use it for both personal and work use. So anybody has it, I'm happy to give it out. But I think during the meeting, I want to try to focus more so on what is going on here.
Okay.
But I think that we can kind of cover both of them if we ask staff if they can post the video as soon as possible instead of waiting through the 72 hours, because we have a meeting on Monday and then we have another one on Thursday. That would give them the opportunity 2 days to review the meeting, to get questions to us or to whoever they want to get them to in time for the next meeting.
Can we overrule the council requirement? I'm not sure we can.
Well, you'd be overruling it by making it public, right? So, I mean,
That
72 hours,
was,
like the outside thing, was that 72 hours the outside limit? Could it be posted before that?
it can be, but it's, if I understood Patrick right, he was saying, let's make the requirement less, and I'm not sure that we can, since council adopted it.
Yeah, it wasn't a requirement, just a request.
Yeah, and that's what the language.
If the possibility's there, then great.
Yeah, the language is within, so it can be 24. It can be 3 hours. It can be up to 72. That's just. I think this week took a couple days from Monday's meeting. Denise, the question about being able to be viewed, the mayor already said the committee could do that, since council didn't say you can't. So that's just why I brought it up, because he said we can choose to impose that if we so require.
Hey, Jimmy, I'd like to hear, Josh was going to weigh in on the publishing timeline. Josh, did you have a comment on that?
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
So are we good on that one? We're sitting at 6:04.
Yeah, I think so. I think the point that resonates with me is that our charter is a 6-month charter, and there's a lot of context to what happens, at these meetings, and I think time allows us to bring that context into play. And I appreciate you hearing us out, Jimmy. I know this was important to you, but
all right.
I think the consensus here is let's kind of hold it as is, and if something changes, we can discuss it again.
I do have one question. Does anybody beside me support that? I just want to know. And there's my answer. Thank you.
I'd like to talk about a meeting cadence. I know on Mondays, I think, is next Monday a council meeting?
Yes, next Monday is a council meeting.
It is.
Okay. And so there was a request that we not do it the same night that we have council meetings. So what does next week look like? And can we get 2 in, do we think? So that we can move on the next group of recommendations and get through at least section B, if not section C.
I think in terms of day, Patrick had mentioned as long as we can finish this meeting at a reasonable time, that Thursdays were okay with him, and I didn't hear any other strong objections to it.
I have a meeting on the second Thursday of every month, which is next Thursday, starts at 4 o'clock with the groundwater district.
And generally Thursdays work for me, but next week I'm already booked.
So do we try just one day and maybe shoot for, I don't know, Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Does anyone have availabilities on Saturdays? Because we are going to have a lot to discuss, and as Ralph pointed out, identifying all the meter problems is going to take some time, and I think that's something that would be good to do in person.
Can I throw something out from the staff point of view?
Poor guys.
You're asking for something on Saturday? So just a thought on that you're including staff?
Yeah.
I don't know if the...
Can I ask...
Ralph, would you foresee on our gathering a meeting that's specifically about what are the problems we want to tackle? How much staff requirement do you think that would be other than getting the recording going?
Well, I think you're going to I think you would end up having to have Nancy. They're the ones that are dealing with problems, right? People calling in.
Yeah, I would tend to think that we'd want just what we've got as a quorum here for staff right now. We might pull in the engineering manager in that discussion when we start this, but we were probably in one important thing. It's a meeting process. You can't go very long. Everybody goes brain dead anyway. So, you're looking at an hour, two, and then you go to break and you're going to come back and take another run at it. So, we're not talking an arduous process. I like face-to-face, but I'm old school. This will work. It's just a little bit more difficult, but it's doable.
How does Tuesday of next week look, 4 to 6?
That's what I'm thinking. Tuesday would work for me.
Who would not work for?
The 9th?
Yes.
One other thing, did you want Mr. Upton to be at this meeting as well?
Not necessarily.
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Yeah, because he will not be available next week.
Okay. I think we've got some work to do before we bring him in.
Any conflicts with Tuesday, 4 to 6 next week?
Hearing none.
Right, let's set that, and the goals for the next meeting are going to be to bring and review our additional comments in support of recommendations 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 13, and 15, and then to begin discussion in a similar format on recommendations 5, 8, 11, and 16 as time permits. Given that there are stated caveats by staff, we may have more robust conversation on each one of these. So I think planning to get through as many items as we did today is probably unlikely. So I would recommend to you that we revisit item 3230 in addition to recommendations 5 and 8. And then we move to 11 and 16 as time allows.
I have one quick question, Steve. As far as tasks go, there's got to be some items that we have to have done for budget implications that are going to be taken up towards the end of the month, correct, with the council?
Correct, and that in my mind is what's pushing 3230 towards the top of this, Patrick.
Right, I think that we determine the whole meeting next time starts off with 3230. If we get to something else, great. And then going forward, I mean, they gave us a 6-month time frame on this committee, but there's other items that are going to come into play that are going to take a longer period of time. I mean, obviously, meeting twice a week for 4 hours a week for 6 months is kind of unrealistic, and we may need to extend the time of this out to work on the smaller items, the SOPs, some of the items that are that need to happen where we have to start implementing some of the other stuff, because those are going to change as soon as that starts happening.
Yeah, I understand your point, and there are also information requests to go along with that. We're putting after a Thursday meeting, staff literally has a day, maybe a day and a half to prep comments for us for a Tuesday night meeting, because they've got council meeting on Monday, and that consumes a lot of their time. I know that we've got some open information requests on staff and probably some additional ones tonight to really explore 3230. I would agree that we can do what we can, and maybe out of that comes additional information that we need, and we ought to put a reasonable stop to it if we feel like we can't make additional progress.
Can I suggest that we put one action item for the agenda to talk about information request around 3230 in specific in terms of financial discussions, so we can kind of consolidate this into some deliverable package that Ms. Massey and her folks can work on and figure out? Because we're going to need some of that before we make a decision. We need to package that early.
Are you talking about the outstanding revenue?
Yeah, and some other, and with some, well, all I'm making the point is, if there is some decisions or options that we might want to consider in terms of dates, in terms of implementation schedule that impacts the financials, we need to have that discussion and consolidate that to something. It's just right now we're asking for them to do everything, and that's not reasonable.
I think that's a good approach.
Behind the scenes, I've already started discussions around the 3230 and trying to find the dollar value of the revenue gap. I sent out the write-up from Jimmy, and I've talked to Nancy, and so maybe that's our biggest number one hitter on Tuesday is what's the methodology we're going to use? And how quickly can we do that?
And in particular, you know, the discussion, especially after the presentation last go round, you know, what are all those users look like? Because I have a funny feeling there's a lot of large users that represent a chunk of this value. And so recognizing that the unbilled usage is from a citizenry, you know, residency standpoint, it's got a large number. But the implication again goes back to what Ref Tillis said. What are those tiers? So we just need we need to put some boundaries around what we think we've got to have to know to decide, so that staff has time to do this. I'm trying to help you.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, and I think it's a good goal for the meeting that we either between now and then collect the open information requests, make others, which we can do with our buckets. That, you know, we can literally write an information request with an email, and or bring it to the discussion forum around 3230 next Tuesday. And I think it's a very good goal, Ralph, to try to brainstorm all those items that we might need to learn about before we can actually consider this and then take action and make a recommendation. So back to Patrick's point, I think given the urgency of that, we put 3230 on the top of the agenda. Time permitting, we continue to list the standing agenda of unaddressed items, as today's agenda says, we continue with standing items such as setting the next agenda and things like that. So Dara, Nancy, we'll work with you, Denise and I, on coming up with a written agenda for Tuesday, and we'll have to do this quickly. I think it's got to be published tomorrow.
Hey, Steve, I think we need to have on the list that we're going to approve and adopt the amended 2A.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jimmy.
So I think that needs to be at the top, is go over the whatever Ms. Hewitt needs to add and just get that adopted.
Right behind the minutes.
Yep.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Steve. Just want to point out, Denise, I'll just look for the information that you're going to send forward on tomorrow, so we know what to put the agenda together and to get that out to you tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, any other open issues on this agenda item, number 6, which is, we didn't get to the question I had added around what happens if we think we need information or resources that may cost money. And I had asked Kevin Cole to address that. And because he stepped out early, I suggest we kick that to the next discussion and let him put some comments on that as liaison between staff and council.
Okay.
If there's no other items, I recommend, Denise, unless you're aware of anything, that we adjourn, begin to capture minutes, and then I'll work with you in the morning tomorrow to bang out this agenda, and we can get it off to Nancy and Dara.
Okay, good deal. I think we're at a place of adjournment. That is 6:17 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for your evening. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.